All right, Ganesh Cheesh, how Doyexon, it's great to see everybody. Um, Welcome. This is our last week of classes, so I've asked Lori to share some information with us about Waldorf and that methodology and how it can really fit with Indigenous language revitalization. We'll also probably talk a little bit today about making and maintaining dictionaries, and then whatever else you guys want to talk about. The important thing, there's no class 1 week from today. We meet on Wednesday. That's our final meeting. Um, and so we'll also talk a little bit today and on this Wednesday about these final 5 documents that we're making. Okay, take it away, Laura.
Thanks. I'm gonna share my screen. So just to give you a little bit of background of how Waldorf, um, I don't even think the magazine exists anymore. It was called Utney, and it was an alternative magazine. And they talked about this pedagogy and education that was about teaching the whole child, head, hands, and heart. And I just went, I want to see a school that looks at children as whole human beings, not just floating heads, but that they have a heart and a body, and that we all learn through all three of them. And the more I saw the schools, I just fell in love with the approach. Um, it's very elitist. You have to pay a lot of money to go to a Waldorf school. And so I decided to get my public education degree and then go back and get a Waldorf education so that I could bring it into the public schools so that all kids can have an opportunity for this kind of approach. Um, and so this is like the main thing. If you take anything away from Waldorf, this is the opening. Head, hands, heart. You're thinking, you're feeling, and then you're willing. You know that the will of the child is through movement and producing and creating out in the world. And they also see child development in 7-year stages. So 0 to 7 is the goodness in the world. You're working together to provide and contribute to the world in goodness. And then from 7 to 12, 13, it's really supposed to be 14, but kids, adolescence seems to be getting at a younger age, is about beauty and artistic growth. And then when they're in adolescence, it's about truth and the intellect. And I will always remember this image about they're like, we don't understand. It's like a flower. Why would you pour all of this fertilizer on a flower and force it to grow early instead of allowing the sun and the rain and just letting a flower grow naturally without forcing it to grow too prematurely? And they often talked about the intellect coming way too early for children and pushing them ahead of when they're ready. And that if we just have schooling that allows the rhythms of the child growing, it will blossom fully instead of forcing it too early. And I would have to say that our schools push way too early, forcing kids before they're able to grow in a holistic way. So it started with Rudolf Steiner, and he's an Austrian who was asked by a factory owner, a German factory owner. It just came out of World War I, and he said, I want to provide a free education to all of the workers and their children in my company because I don't ever want another war to come again. And so this is about educating human beings to create a just and peaceful society. It's holistic, and there's a sense of ethics that goes into it, as well as the importance of play. So that's what he did. And there's now 1,000 schools all over the world, and it started there in Germany. So part of the Waldorf curriculum is all of these things. It's Yes, you have the academics, but you have form drawing, which will be interesting once you see form drawing compared to form line. But form drawing is, again, this beautiful way of showing the intricacy of drawing, and it, I'll show you some of those. Science, nature is huge. Outdoors, even the schools itself is all natural materials. You wouldn't see a plastic chair or a plastic table. Everything's wooden. There's a nature table to represent the seasons. Everything is made out of natural materials. There's visual arts, music, movement, two foreign languages, and handwork and woodwork. So they have a curriculum. I think handwork, you start out finger knitting, and then you make your own knitting needles out of wood and rubbing beeswax and sandpaper, and you learn how to knit, and then you learn how to sew, and then you learn how to carve. And then when you're in 12th grade, you are, I think, and there's weaving. And then in 12th grade, you make a big project. One was a dulcimer, others made other things. And they have a wood workshop. And please jump in. Drama and speech, that is its own, lots of recitation, lots of oral language. And as June said in the last class, oral language is the foundation of all literacy. So they don't push reading until second grade because they want children to be able to hear the richness of language and the richness of stories without forcing it into a, C-spot run. It's like you have to fall in love with the language and stories to want to learn to read, not push reading before you have an understanding of story and all the lessons in it. So, yeah, kids catch up, but they have a rich vocabulary because they're not pushed into this narrow view of what language and reading should be. It's integrated, totally integrated. In some ways, Waldorf and Montessori, somebody said it's like two wings of a dove because they both are about peace and justice. But Montessori is much more independent. It's more like independent work. You go and do your work, and you have a tray, and June can talk more about that better than I could. But Waldorf is more group oriented, I think. But we both have main lesson blocks. I think Montessori calls it the main lesson period or the great period, and Waldorf calls it the main lesson block, where you've 2 hours, 3 hours in the morning where you're in the same room and everything is integrated. There's imaginative play, there's stories about everything to make abstract concepts feel concrete and connected. There's song, movement, poetry, yeah. And there's a rhythm to the day. Everything has a rhythm. So you take in information just like you're breathing in information, and then children have to do something with it. So we were taught that when you make a lesson plan, you don't talk more than the uh, age of the child in minutes, and then they have to do something with it, breathe it out. So the whole lesson is this feeling of rhythm, breathing in, taking in information, and then doing something with it and putting it out into the world. And lots of outdoor purposeful work. And here's an example of the main lesson book. So there's no like basal reader. Children create their own books about topics that are integrated. And there's always maybe a written page, and then there's an image. So for example, the children are learning the letter W, but there will be a story told maybe about the waves and the wind, and there's a whole story around it. And so then when they're learning about this letter, the story comes back, and they'll start talking about, remember those waves? Let's draw the waves in this story. And you can see embedded in the waves is that W. So even when children are learning a letter, They have a story behind it, they have a feeling around it. And then after they've experienced the story and all of it, then they'll say, "Oh, by the way, this is W," but that's an afterthought. Now the children have this rich understanding of a story and a feeling behind it before they go to the abstract. Here's just to give you an example of a Waldorf school, classroom. You'll notice lots of natural materials, lots of color. Yeah, I'll jump to a video to give you an example of some of the things, traditional. Oh yeah, sorry. I'll jump ahead here.
See this working. When I think of early childhood, I think from 0 to 7. Then we have
Sorry, we
such
don't see the
very little
video.
time just to treasure movement.
What's that?
We don't see the video.
Oh, you
Just
don't see the video. I'm sorry.
same slide.
Okay. Can you see it now?
I just see a teacher sitting around with students.
Do you see it now? No. Let's see.
Is it embedded in this slideshow?
How about if I'll try it again. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts so far? Is this okay, René?
It's great.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
When I think of early childhood, I think from 0 to 7. Then we have such very little time just to treasure movement and play and healthy rhythm and healthy routine.
The basis of Waldorf education is the understanding of the human being that comes through the work of Rudolf Steiner.
Everything we do in the classroom, from all the sewing, all the craft activities, all those things are fine motor skills, because at this age there's incredible brain development that takes place.
Do you mind if I show you my Foxy?
I really like the way Waldorf approaches the developmental stage of the child and really looks to where the child is at and how they best learn.
When I was really, really small in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, it was just magical, and there were these stories and there were these characters.
And the fox had said,
They were real kings and queens and princesses in my mind.
Every aspect of the curriculum that's introduced in each grade is brought based on a knowledge of how the child's inner life is unfolding at that stage.
This pairing of introducing the world with the developmental capacity means is the child is never overwhelmed, but always stretched.
And what were they doing then? Alberta, what happens in a Waldorf school is that the approach is artistic. And it is also rigorous.
In the Renaissance, you're supposed to be like a universal man.
The Waldorf approach is to really wait until they're ready for it, even hungry for it. And then when you introduce it to them, they take it up with enthusiasm rather than feeling pressured to go there.
And then you take some of it off. It's never really a command. It's never do this or do that or this is what you should think. Ever. It's these are the possibilities. This is one way to look at it. What do you think?
So when you look to draw this, you try to capture the mood, you're working on the anatomy of the head and the angle. We're often asked as teachers about the paintings we'll do, and they'll say, well, they're all the same. The fact is, if you spend any time observing each one, you begin to see unbelievable differences.
When you have to write it yourself, illustrate it yourself, you take your personal pride in the product because this is your work.
I remember every article or poem or essay I wrote because I drew a picture around it, and once we learned calligraphy, there was a calligraphy title and there were colorful borders, and it's really hard to forget information when you really can make it your own.
And every school book is different, it's personal. So you just create their own textbooks.
Yeah. This is how you learn math.
It instills in you a little obsession with beauty. I mean, everything needs to be aesthetic, and with that just comes a lot of pride in your work too.
You see, they can draw beautifully. Their writing skills, their science skills, their botanical drawing skills, math and the physics and so on. Plus the basketball, the volleyball, the social activism and all that kind of thing.
It was like cross-training. Because I was exposed to art at such an early age, and bringing that to a technical field like engineering really set me apart to come up with new ideas and to communicate those ideas.
That spark of creativity and of innovativeness.
On an intellectual level and on a physical level.
Really wanting to get this to work exactly the way I want it to work.
Learning that I can learn how to figure it out.
Okay, see this little dark bit right there?
What my daughter learned is to really focus in depth on what she's doing and pay complete attention to it, which is the way we perform best. And what I'm afraid other children are learning is that multitasking is the way to be, and current cognitive science says that's really going to hurt them in the long run.
Stop there. I just wanted to give you a sense of what they have. I mean, all the woodworking and the handwork and the recitation. There's poetry every morning. So when I worked with Mary Folletti, I'm sorry for getting her, can't get name, and the gentleman from Yakutat, where we talked about a morning recitation. And so they shared something that they wanted the kids to learn and saying Klingit. And so there's movement put to it, and they have a biodynamic garden. Yeah, it's a very much integrated kind of work. So I'm going to stop sharing and then just show you the Lakota, how they are integrating Waldorf into their program. Let's see. Can you still see it all? The YouTube?
Yep.
Yep, okay, all right. Here's... stop there just for time, knowing that I've already gone a little over. So, yeah, I didn't know if you could see if there might be any of this philosophy that might fit into your thought process for starting a program, but I'm happy to help any way I can, and also using this to help shape a little bit of this idea of starting our violin program. And don't know if there's time for that, but I'll pass it over to Hune and see if there's anybody that wants to have any questions.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anybody thoughts, questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm trying out a new setup anyway. Yeah, I was kind of asking about Waldorf methodology a while back, because one of the real interesting things that I see about it is the idea of getting to the written part later, which in our Tsimshian language and Smalgak, one of the biggest struggles right now, especially for somebody coming in, is most of the resources are in one orthography, but if you're dealing with us in Alaska, which are very active in the revitalization, then it's a different orthography, and people getting really hung up on what spelling I'm using and what I'm doing, and the two orthographies kind of not force, but really it's natural for somebody to try to pick a lane. And especially if there's more resources, written resources are easily Googleable in one or the other, then that kind of becomes the thing. And the discussion every time of which one we're using, or if we're trying to integrate both and all that kind of stuff. If we reduce that to hear it, say it, then our lessons go so much more smoothly if it's oral based versus when we start putting up the spellings, or if people stop to start asking about spellings. And I feel like in a real introductory, or in the first part, taking that aspect out of it and just going off of hearing it and saying it, and repeating what you're learning and stuff like that, seems to move things along a lot quicker, and bring those differences in the dialects down to accent more than, so that's something that why I was asking about that, is I really see the benefit of that as an overall program. I could see how resources and urgency in teaching would make this difficult methodology for anything beyond the littlest folks, but I really love it's a really beautiful program, and seeing it integrated with native cultures, of course, that's just makes sense. It's where they got their ideas.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I again, coming back, I do think there's multiple paths in terms of developing these education programs. And then it sort of comes down to this primary question, like, what is education and what should it be? What are the tools that are out there, and how do you assemble them? And just like, we don't have to pick one, but you just sort of, you pick these things that are from it. And I do think there's a lot from Waldorf methodology that just lines up really well. The hands on, like if kids are crocheting and stuff, like they could be weaving, like you could just switch the medium like very easily. And just in terms of like, and then these are some things like beyond the methods and material. On the methods side is like, how does the day start? What's the first thing? What's the next thing? Can you be consistent with your calendars and with your structure? Which I'm often not, but those are some things like, if can the program become consistent, because then you should be able to mirror those consistencies from when they're starting preschool all the way up, so that it just helps it to develop and maintain a culture. Other thoughts?
I forgot to mention that the philosophy he termed it anthroposophy, which is wisdom of man. So you're right. It's the wisdom of thousands of years, so yeah. And there is definitely a rhythm and routine. That whole main lesson is you sing, you do poetry, you move, you play games, you create your own book about it, so that you're just deepening your understanding of whatever it is you're doing. So even when they're studying the plant cycle, they're collecting dyes, they're taking plant dyes to use that in the handwork. And so everything is integrated.
I was really impressed, and it made a lot of sense. Um, the engineer who was is exposed to art at a really early age because of the Waldorf system, and when he got into engineering, it really helped him become a creative problem solver. It was like he had a leg up against uh, competitors. I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah, I think there's a day when we have a course, but I don't know how we do it. Like, so as we go through and try and develop a program that really creates language teachers, there's ways that you can do it so that you're saying, okay, here's some things that are common to just teaching indigenous languages, to teaching second languages, and also to just teaching, right? So then a part of it is going to be early childhood development. And so, like, I think the reality is the majority of early childhood development, if you just took any course in Alaska, I would venture to guess that it's a fairly colonial perspective, right? Like, I don't think that you're going to get like the Yupik, like you're not going to come out of a course saying, okay, I know how Yupiks feel generally about how children develop and what their needs are. So when I was in Hawaii, before I learned really any Hawaiian, like one of the first semesters there, they had us just go visit this class, and it was early childhood development. And not only was it from a Hawaiian perspective, but it was entirely in the Hawaiian language. So I remember sitting there looking at my two colleagues and saying, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm pretty sure this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. Because but you, in Alaska, again, you'd have to modify that so that you are deciding, like, what are the principles that you're going to say. These are fairly universal concepts, and then maybe you are doing a bit of, here's some Montessori methodology, here's some Waldorf methodology. We're not going to certify you in them, but we're going to give you a thorough introduction. And then also, are there others that we need to be incorporating? And as we build that, then we'll say, okay, maybe someone does go and get certified, in one or the other or both for your program. It kind of depends on your community, your your program, the culture that you're developing, and you know, it's a tool, and it's a great tool to understand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add Silicon Valley CEOs put their children in Waldorf schools. They said that the computers, that it's just a tool, but if you don't have the creative thinking to use the tools, so it's kind of funny how, you know, all of these big wigs have their kids in Waldorf schools. And there is a big, like, they do ask families, please keep your children away from devices and TVs and screens. I don't know how well it's followed, but yeah, that the hope is that they're not on screens until much later. And then I forgot to mention that the Waldorf teacher follows the child. So it used to be kindergarten, you go to school just for kindergarten because kindergarten is so precious. And then I have a first through eighth grade certificate, and it's because you're to follow the children all the way. Your class goes with you from first grade through eighth grade. I don't know if the reality of that is really, I think it may be K first through fifth, and then there might be another teacher. I think most Waldorf schools that tends to be the case, but there is something really beautiful about staying with your children. I had Austin at the charter school, which had a little bit of Waldorf influence, and we stayed with our kids for our students, sorry, for several years. And yeah, it allows for a lot of rich learning because you have many years together.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. And yeah, everybody know that Lori's a resource, and so she can come and do trainings, do Waldorf trainings if you have a program or if you end up in a program that you feel like would benefit. Because there was a lot of things that we took from it as far as the Tlingit language nest, which was the crossing of these planes of the body, and also like developing songs and focusing on transitions. And so there are a number of different chants and songs and other things that were developed so that the kids, as soon as they heard that, it really helped to cue them in. Like we had specific songs for like basically saying, "Hey everybody, whatever you took out, like put it back." So it was, because the other thing too is just being able to control the space, and it's really interesting too to think about that, because within all of this, and within probably in your statement of the your philosophy of education, is like what should a student, what should their values be? So I would say in Hawaii, one of the big differences, just talking to folks in Hawaii and with Six Nations, the Mohawk program, is the Hawaiian program was like, you do what the teacher says. Like that. Someone shared this one story with me because we got in trouble one time because we didn't listen. And I won't say who got in trouble, but we all got in trouble. I won't say who got us in trouble. Uh, but basically, we didn't listen to the teacher, and they almost like sent us home out of the program. Like it was really bad. So we got this scolding, and the scolding included this narrative, which was one time there was a student of hula. So she was learning how to dance, and hula is a very big deal. And she was going to this statewide hula competition. So her family had been raising money and, made sure that she could go. So she flies there with her teacher, and they call it a kumu. That's what they call the teacher. So the kumu goes and sets up the hotel room and everything, and they go and they fly together and they get checked in, and they go to the hotel room, and then the kumu says, "Okay, you wait here. I'm gonna go get some things, and I'll come right back." And the teacher leaves and goes and gets some things, and on the way back sees that the student had opened the door and is looking out the hotel room. So the teacher comes back and says, "Okay, grab your suitcase. We're going home." And that was it. Took him home. Game over. 100%, because they are very, very certain about the discipline that a person is supposed to have, and that they need to, everything they're told, that's what they need to do. And then we asked them too, and that comes from their family structure. Like we talked about Hawaiian family structure there, and we just sort of asked them a question. We said, "Hey, if your dad or your mom was really making a mess of things, could you suggest them to them how they should be doing things? Could you give them corrective sort of things?" And they said, "Oh, you mean like if dad's like really messing up and we could tell him how to do it?" And we're like, "Yeah." And they said, "Never, never." And it was very fast and very certain. All of them, all across, it was unanimous. They said, "Never. I will get clubbed outside my head if I said anything. Even if you knew dad was doing it wrong." And so, but when we talked with folks from Mohawk, they were like, "Well, everybody's a human being, and you're not supposed to really tell other people what to do." Which was so it was really interesting too to figure out like what kinds of things in a school, if you built a school, what kinds of things would make sense in terms of, you know, it was just wild. Like, and not everybody's the same. Not everything has to be the same. But I remember this one teacher over there in Hawaii. I probably told you guys this before, but the kids they go get lunch. It's delivered because their school is very small. It's huge and amazing, but there's no on-site lunchroom. There's no cafeteria. They have all their food delivered to the kids, and so the kids go and they pick up their food and then they go bring it back to their classroom where they eat. And in Hawaiian culture, you're not supposed to talk when you eat. You just eat and you just be quiet. And that's not all the time. right? Like I go hang out with people, we'll go to lunch all the time, just blah, 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 blah. But that's what they teach our kids. And so Na'alima is a kindergarten teacher over there. And so he came, he says, I want to show you a classroom. Take a look. And I looked in, very quiet. A little light whispering, kids eating. Very quiet. I mean, the kids were talking, but it was so quiet. I was like, this is great. He's like, oh yeah? Now come look at my classroom. And you go in and nothing. Nothing. There's zero sound. These kindergartners, like 20 of them. And so I thought, like, how do you do that? But then is that going to be your program? Do kids talk when they eat? Do kids, do they raise their hand? Do they, just a whole bunch of just all this stuff, And you're going to have to, the beauty is you get to build it from the ground up. The tough part is none of it is made for you. Yeah, and coming back to that as well, like what Kosh was sharing in the chat would be, and maybe what do you do about the kids, some kids you'll tell them what to do and they'll go do the thing. I remember one time they brought me into classroom to see if I wanted to teach, and as a kindergarten classroom, and they had a little flip-up desk. This kid had a flip-up desk, and he's flipping his desk up. And I was like, hey man, don't flip up your desk. Just listen. Listen to what I'm telling you. And he stood up, this little 5-year-old, and he picked up his desk and he flipped the whole thing over. And I was like, or flip it upside down. I don't know. I guess do whatever you want. And then the teacher came in. She was like, rah! And she just yelled at him, and he just sat down and stuff. But it was an inner city school in Minneapolis. And yeah, so, like all this stuff. But also, yeah, like looking at what Duck Juice was sharing, my brother was punched in the 3rd grade. I was nearly punched in junior high, right? So, and when I went to school, the principal had a paddle above his, hanging up on the wall. It wasn't decorative. We knew. We heard stories about it. But, what are you going to do when 2 kids get in a fight? Like, all this stuff. You have to figure out all this stuff. Okay.
I just wanted to share too, if I heard last week about all of the grant writing, and just to let you know, that's another piece that I would love to help with. I think Sani and I are working with Kushyeik to try to get right, Sani, for a culture camp in Sitka. But yeah, I work for a nonprofit and write lots of grants. So yeah, yay, Sani. So, as Julio says, we have to work together. I don't speak the language well. I'm working on it, but I have other skills that being part of this group, I can't always be here, but I would love to just let you all know that if there's anything I can do to help in the way of writing grants or with, teaching practices that you might be interested in, just let me know.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
That is sheesh. And yeah, grant writing is another big part of it. One more comment on that. Like, I don't think a language school should have corporal punishment. Um, but the principal that we had in elementary school who used to paddle kids, and he was pretty tough and pretty mean. He was scary. I don't know. But the ice rink was a sheet of glass. So he really took care of the ice rink. So then he left like halfway through, and we got this very nice principal, but he never took care of the ice. So we had like chunky, bad ice for playing hockey. And me and my brothers were like, man, taking a whooping was almost worth it because we had like nice ice because we played a lot of hockey. But also the chat, we should take a look at our schools and propose new names for them, especially if they're named after people who, because some of this stuff is funny, but a lot of it is also abusive, and a lot of it also, like, once you start getting into, I mean, there was and he's a fun guy. We call him Kashechishti. His Tlingit name is clubs people on the head, because when he was first starting to do immersion, getting us to do some like more immersion activities, he would say, well, I got this pencil, and I'm going to come around and bonk you in the head if you're speaking English. And I said, you're a white guy and you're going to hit us for speaking a language. I was like, you just need to, like, I'm kind of all for it, but I also just want to acknowledge like how strange that is, because that used to happen when these elders would speak Tlingit. And so as we look at those things, those are, but I guess for me, it's always this balance. Your primary focus has to be building the new things that we need, the new programs, the new curricula, the new schools. And then I think your secondary focus is fixing all the other things. But I think you have to know you cannot bring a language back by fixing the existing school. That's just not going to happen. I think you have to build your own thing. But it's a capacity question as well. Like I could envision a day when there's maybe 3 of these immersion schools in Southeast Alaska, and then every single school has a much higher level of language and culture curriculum that's relevant and up to date, and that's legitimized through the curricular process and is not marginalized or just this little thing that fades out after elementary school. But I think if you really wanted to say, okay, we're going to bring our languages back from the brink, I think there has to be these language nests and immersion schools. But and then probably a media network on top of it. But maybe we'll talk a little bit on Wednesday about grant writing. I guess just to sort of close us off today, I want to show you folks, just so you know what's out there. We talk about methodologies and we talk about materials. There's a program called TLEX, which is pretty complicated. I had to figure out a bunch of stuff. I ruined a whole bunch of stuff. But basically, it's a customizable, complex database that's really designed for dictionary making. And I'm sure there's other ones out there, but this is the one that I use for, this is the engine beneath the dictionary of Tlingit that I've been working on, or the Tlingit dictionary. So basically, you have your entries here, and you gotta do a whole bunch of work to begin with. But if we wanted to do this, especially for any of our Alaska Native languages, I'd be happy to do some of the initial work and to also work with the folks who are going to set it up and keep it maintained. I think the biggest thing is having a living dictionary, so it's easy to update. It's also easy to put out new editions, fix errors, and also to make sure that it's somewhat encyclopedic, meaning you could look up something and see, I know the text is kind of small, but you see idaka, next to or neighboring, right? And then you can have some other information on there, and then you could see these other things below. But I think if you have a concept in Tlingit like kiwa, like that it just needs more explanation than a single word. So you also have room to explain some things. Let me find it. So you get to kiwa, and you have heavenly or the sky, and then you have basically what's in blue is your single word equivalent in English, or maybe 1 or 2. And then what you have next to it is the actual definition. So basically you could have, I could say chuskush, and then for the blue it would probably say foot. And then for here, the definition, it would say big toe. Because then when we switch it over to English, and so maybe I'll have foot and toe in here, but then I'll say big toe, right? Because then when it switches over to English, you got to think about how are you going to organize that stuff. If you had a bunch of different names for ducks, does that all go under duck, or does that go under, bufflehead and scoter and like all these different types of ducks, right? So you got just a bunch of language questions to sort of keep track of. I also try to put in initials, who told me the thing. So there's a bunch of words that weren't documented. And there's a bunch of dictionaries that get poured into this from other amazing work that's been done in Tlingit country. But then I've got it separated So these are all non-verbs. And then so you go in, it shows you the parts of speech like compound noun. It'll show you the parts that are sort of made up in it. Something very cool about Kiwa is it's related to the Northern Lights, and it's related to this place where people go if they die a violent death or if they die by suicide. And they end up being Kiwakawu. And then meteor and meteorites are related to that. The missile of the heavenly people. The eclipse is related to that. And then anyone with some sort of mental disability like autism or any sort of related thing, we'll call them Kiwakawu Yahai, the image of the heavenly people. So sometimes this stuff, like, or if you get a concept like, probably Atu probably has a lot of, or Jinaha, we'll look up Jinaha. So in older dictionaries, like for people would define Jinaha as like bad luck. But that was it. And so that's all. And so how is a user of the language going to actually know how to use that word? So then as I went in and talked to different people about it, Jinaha is, for me, it was like there was Tliqas and Jinaha. So Tliqas is something you're not supposed to do, and the Jinaha is the consequence for doing the thing you're not supposed to do. But so sometimes you need to sort of figure that kind of stuff out. And then if you go down, about a year ago, I separated all of the verbs. So now all of the verbs are under the verb root. So this is another thing, like how are you going to organize this stuff? How are you going to alphabetize, right? So when I thought about it, I thought it doesn't make sense to have E and then other letters and then or so have the I and have a bunch of other letters and then get to the EE or whatever. So instead I grouped all the vowels. So the A vowels, the E vowels, the I vowels, the U vowels. So the double O sound, if you want to look up ooh, you wouldn't go right after N, you'd go after T, because T, U, right? So you just get to think about this stuff. Sorry, I didn't reopen the chat. But I am happy to, yeah, you could, if you had them all into a spreadsheet, do batch uploads, but I don't know how to do that. So basically, what I do is, do you guys see this pop-up window? This is new lemma. So there's also these terms. So like lemma is like the word. And so if I were to put something in here, like kushta, and I've already got it in there, but whatever. So now it's blank. So you basically got to right click and add a sense. And then for sense, you're going to say here, maybe otter. And then under definition, I'll put land otter. And there's another name for it, river otter. So the thing you have to remember is like, when does it need to have a whole new field? Because this will actually put it out as like otter, land otter, comma, river otter. And then I might need probably need some explanation here. Just like an otter is not an ordinary animal, right? So I might put a whole bunch of spiritual information here, which I probably did. One of the most spiritually powerful animals in Tlingit, blah, 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 right? So as you build these new entries, like it's sort of a one at a time thing when I do it. But then you know, it just sort of depends because this thing I think has, I'm trying to find, oh, I'll find it somewhere. There's thousands of entries, I'm sure, in here, probably an awful lot. But then as you go through, so this, it'll have, oops, that's under the wrong spot. No, I just found an error. So there's the scientific name, and so this should be under the scientific name. And then if you go in, so the downside here is there's an awful lot to learn in order to do this. The upside is like I've been working in this, so I'd be happy to help. Like if we want to make one for Hutkil, let's do it. We want to make one for Smalgach, let's do it. You could put multiple. So ours, there's. Let me erase this so I don't forget. So you can also go in and enter dialect information so that it could still alphabetize, but then you can have like, for some of it, it could be the spelling thing, like the different orthographies. That's a bit of a tough one because then you got to write every single word twice, but go for it. But also you could have like, well, we call it this, but if you go there, they call it this. So it's just one more tool I wanted to show you. There's lots to it. You can export into HTML. You can export into a rich text file. So basically, I will export this into a text file and then import that into a program called InDesign. And it takes a long time. So like every time I want to make a significant update, it takes me about 4 hours between exporting, importing, going through and doing some formatting consistencies. But you could change the colors, you could change the fonts, you could change a whole bunch of stuff in this program. You can also set up a whole bunch of different, it's very customizable, but it is not very user-friendly. But I'd be happy to do like basically a course on this if we wanted to. But it might make more sense to just sort of do these living dictionary projects, which we've been thinking about doing a grant for. So anyways, we are out of time. It's always fun to see you folks, and we'll chat with you guys on Wednesday's our last actual class. Bring all the questions, everything. Bring it all. And yeah, we'll see you folks soon.
Cheese.
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 Ogden.